policy workshop on a problem that has continued to grow and one for which we have increasing lack of tolerance on illegal dumping, penalties, and conditions. And we have had Mr. Ruiz prepare with his team this workshop. So take it away, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning, everyone. Yes, this presentation in some spots will seem like deja vu from February of this year for a number of reasons. One is I already had the presentation from February of this year to update. So on the heels of the commission's discussion at the last agenda study and after the last commission meeting, we've had a couple of different meetings to talk about what we have done since February and what we still need to do based on the commission's guidance back in February, but then also have added a few additional recommendations for which we'll be seeking the commission's guidance and blessing this morning. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the slides from February that haven't changed much. You know, the causes remain the same and have been a big point of discussion for the staff, and that is how do we address those causes? You know, the lack of convenience or inconvenience and the cost are things that lead some to seek a shortcut, and a trip to the North Central landfill is far more time consuming and costly than a trip to an out of the way location inside or outside our city to illegally dump materials, which is usually tires, construction material, and or yard debris from either lawn services or homeowners. I added a bullet there at the bottom for neighborhood apathy, really to get to and talk about Commissioner Walker's recognition that blight breeds blight. And that is, you know, that same broken window theory. When someone sees something that is neglected or unkept, it tends to breed more of the same, and people either contribute to it at worst or they turn a blind eye to it at best. And we want to work to change that, and I'll have some slides at the end of the presentation that'll make that a little bit more clear. So yeah, the locations haven't changed dramatically. This isn't an epidemic to speak of, but it is widespread enough that it contributes to a real public health and appearance problem in our neighborhoods. So yeah, that's all the same. The law remains the same up until even February of this year. You know, this treatment as purely a code violation was our overwhelming response to illegal dumping, and that largely remains so today. The work that our code enforcement and police department teams did up in the Kathleen, Elliott, Kendrick area has seen that area remain largely compliant and clean. There's signage. We did install some cameras at the time, and that for now problem has been mostly resolved, but there are plenty of others. And so we, back in February, talked about having the tools in place, and we have them. It's a matter of, you know, uniformly and equitably and quite firmly enforcing them and using them in cases where we can apprehend, and I say we, knowing that means our police department, because I can't apprehend anyone, and or hold the property owners accountable for the debris and the dumping that they allow to continue, you know, with a bit of compassion, understanding that if they're doing all they can to discourage that behavior, we're not going to penalize them unnecessarily as the victim. So these were the recommendations from February, and they have been, with the exception of of a public awareness campaign that I'll admit and apologize got quite derailed by the COVID-19 pandemic. Most of the rest of this stuff has happened, especially up in that Gladys Leggett neighborhood and north up Kathleen Road. So like I said, we are adding a few more recommendations and going to take that public awareness campaign with Kevin's group, thank you to Kevin, into a much higher gear. So these are recommendations plus, and with the commission's concurrence, we've already reserved through telecommunications the phone number you see on that sign, 834-DUMP, and that will constitute an illegal dumping hotline for the city of Lakeland, and will be automated such that when the caller calls 834-DUMP, they'll be met with a greeting, an instruction that if they are calling about illegal dumping that is in progress, to press 1, and they'll be transferred to the communications center at the Lakeland Police Department 24/7. The dispatcher will be able to send a police officer in the hopes of catching that illegal dumper red-handed or in the act. If they are calling to report the existence of illegal dumping after the fact, that doesn't require a police response, so that will direct them to our code enforcement office. After hours, of course, that number will be answered by voicemail, but during the workday, our staff in code enforcement will answer it. Either way, code enforcement will respond to the location of that illegal dumping junk, trash, debris pile, and will work to resolve it, whether that involves LPD and identifying the owner or the dumper if they were to leave something behind of identifying nature, or if it's a matter of citing the property owner and or getting it swiftly removed by solid waste. The third bullet there is a recommendation from us that the commission bless, and it really isn't a formal appropriation so much as just the commission's agreement to allow us to use $25,000 of essentially unappropriated foreclosure registration revenues that have been used to augment the code enforcement personnel budget over the last couple of fiscal years, but still has ample money in it to handle an initiative like this. It's also been used to pay legal fees when our attorney's office needs to take extraordinary measures against a particularly troublesome property or code violator. So with that 25,000, our plan is to use it, there you see, to remove that debris as quickly as possible in extreme cases. That doesn't mean everybody gets a free pass, or that we're going to use that money to just go clean, and more or less incentivize illegal dumping in our city. We don't want to do that. But we recognize and have talked at length about the existence of solid waste, whether at the curb or on private property, whether legally or illegally dumped. The longer it sits, the more likely it is to attract illegal dumping or others to add to it, because they see it as a spot that will get picked up. And then the balance of the 25,000 we are proposing be used as a reward for tipsters to 834-DUMP whose tips result in arrest of one or more illegal dumpers. We talked a little bit about this back in February. There wasn't unanimous agreement that it was the best idea, but handled in a probably pretty modest fashion on the amount and, to be honest, the frequency with which we'll actually catch somebody. But maybe we will catch a lot of people. I think it's money well spent. If you're talking about, less than $100 or a couple $100, compared to the cost of cleaning up that debris and being able to, I'll say, make an example. I don't mean that quite as harshly as it sounds, but to use that to promote the and to warn others of the consequences of illegally dumping things in our city, I think goes a long way. And that reward is pretty big bang for very little bucks. And we're not talking about 20 of the 25,000 going towards rewards. We're probably talking more like 1,000 or 5,000 at most. Okay, and then we move to recommendations plus. And those are, for a lot of years leading up to sort of the Great Recession or the end of the Great Recession, several city departments held community cleanups in concert with one another before really the Dream Center and the Gang Task Force took that on and ran with it in some particular neighborhoods, Jewel Avenue, Lake Wire. We're proposing to get back to those at least a couple of times a year, not in place of the Dream Center's work, but in addition to the Dream Center's work, hopefully with Mike Cooper's involvement and assistance, at least on the volunteer recruitment side, because that's where he has had so much more success than the staff at getting people interested, whether they live in the neighborhood or whether they're just community service minded. I know he gets a lot of students, but that manpower is invaluable to making these cleanup events work. And the idea behind an event like this is to promote it so that people know within the geographic boundaries of the cleanup that if they put it out at the curb, it will get removed for this cleanup. You don't have to go to landfill. You don't have to go drive out into the countryside and illegally dump it. Put it out at the curb and we will pick it up. And solid waste does that to a large degree now, where an active utility account exists, because that's not illegal dumping. People are expected to put their solid waste out at the curb for removal. And we're going to work really closely with solid waste to make sure that those piles don't sit too long when they are legally dumped, or that they don't sit too long when they're illegally dumped, although that will require more than a simple call to solid waste in some cases. Okay, so then moving on. One of the things that we talked about back in February, I'm sorry, Mayor.
So I just want to pause on this one. So I'm just trying to do logistically. An area would decide we're going to do a cleanup in our area. We announce it to the city in advance that it's going to be this next Saturday. Then on a Monday or something like that, an arrangement will be made for a special pickup as a result of that event. That's kind of the way this would work.
Not exactly. Once we identified a neighborhood or collection of neighborhoods and promoted it, we would want the residents of that neighborhood to place whatever they've got out at the curb in advance of the Saturday cleanup. We even went so far back in the 2000s to have those who might not be physically able to get things out to the curb to contact us in advance. And we would have somebody the day of the cleanup enter onto their property, of course, with their permission, and remove the things that they want to move out to the curb so they could be picked up. Solid waste usually gets into that neighborhood in advance of the Saturday cleanup and actually schedules some extra claw trucks and rear loaders I think Jeff Wood used to refer to it as softening it up before the crowd and the volunteers appear on Saturday, but usually also includes some roll-off containers for tires or furniture and white goods or appliances, and those get removed either the Saturday of or the Monday after the cleanup. But yes, sir, it would look very, very similar to the work that the Dream Center and the Gang Task Force have done, would just be additional, very similar events.
Commissioner Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Ruiz. But now, I thought we already have, as you just already indicated, some particular times of the year where we announce to our residents, boom, this day you put out whatever to be collected, whether it be paint, tires, whatever, you name it. But we're going to do this in addition to those days, those particular times. Am I saying that right?
Not exactly. What you're describing is a hazardous waste collection day. It's a drop-off. They don't put it out at the curb. and Gene's on the call and probably speak to it better than me, but it's done in concert once a year with Polk County, and it's for hazardous materials, paint, end-of-life electronics. I'm drawing a blank on the others, but they have to take that stuff to solid waste, and Polk County actually pays for it. And we explored increasing the number of either hazardous waste collection days, drop-off days, or almost creating a sort of amnesty transfer station. The problem with either of those is they're extremely costly and terribly labor intensive to police. The hazardous waste event costs about $25,000, and the county pays for it now. So if we were to add any beyond that one, it would be extremely expensive. And then Gene has pointed out in a couple of different meetings now, illegal dumping, with the exception maybe of tires, is generally not hazardous waste. It's usually tree debris and construction material, which isn't hazardous. You were talking about shingles and 2x4s and concrete block and things like that. So the hazardous cleanup or hazardous drop-off wouldn't likely result in a noticeable decrease in illegal dumping, since we're not getting the things that are illegally dumped.
Doesn't preclude, Commissioner Walker, however, the fact that people have once a quarter a bulk pickup in front of their home that they can always call in and ask for.
Yes, I understand we do that, but in some of these places where I've been and what you've been to, Mr. Lewis, and others, especially our code enforcement staff, we do see sometimes some hazardous stuff, and of course, especially so the tires. I would say probably outnumber. And if you talk about differentiating between this general stuff being thrown out versus non-hazardous stuff or hazardous stuff, tires is probably the number one kind of situation that will be considered maybe hazardous at best. But if I hear you correct, we will have tires as part of what we may do.
Oh, absolutely. Well, those cleanup events, and aside from those cleanup events, our normal response moving from this workshop is to address blight, whether that's illegally dumped, whether it's legally dumped, whether it's at the curb or on private property or in unimproved alleys. If we find it or we get alerted to it, we're going to work very, very hard to address it swiftly. That's going to involve LPD. It's going to involve solid waste and construction and maintenance and code enforcement for sure. This is, when I mention these things, none of these things are the only thing that will happen. We are trying to come at this from as many different directions with as many different tools as you will allow us. So additional cleanups are just another way of trying to instill community pride and clean some things up at the same time and bring a little bit of convenience for those owner residents who, are holding on to something that they probably weren't going to illegally dump, but we can make it easy for them to get rid of it and prevent it from sitting at the curb for very long.
Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Brian. I just wondered if this had been considered by you and your team. I know that when the Dream Center had an additional dumpster located on their property, that kind of was helpful because then it kind of became the community dumpster. I mean, I don't know how much a dumpster costs, if there's ways to kind of create areas where we have a community dumpster and that funds are set aside for things like that, where people know after they've had a graduation party and they've got all this trash, those days that they have all that extra trash, they just know where they can take it. Has that been a consideration?
A little bit. I understand that our solid waste manager might want to chime in. This seems like a really good spot for him to do that.
Yeah, just to clarify a few things, Gene Ginn, solid waste manager. I'm going to start back with tires. in the ordinance we have, and in the resolution, every active account is allowed 4 free tires per year. We'll pick up 4 tires at your home and dispose of them for free. Once we pick up the 4, then it's $5 a piece after that. So that system is already in place. A lot of times tires end up not in a place where there's not an active account. We just take care of them. Part of our operation. Secondarily, to address a neighborhood type drop-off location dumpster, it basically ends up becoming an eyesore or a mini landfill. Also, if people do have extra trash or things from parties, all they have to do is put it in bags next to their container, and they're allowed 4 free extra pickups per year. So I don't think that would solve any issues other than create one with a mini landfill in a neighborhood. And then as we referred to, the hazardous waste collection event, that's about $20,000 to $25,000 a year, depending on the amount of material we collect. It's in conjunction with the county. We could certainly explore. It's required by the county to do those events because of their obligations and keeping it out of the landfill. We could certainly try to explore that opportunity to maybe have an additional one. So that's really all I have to add to the conversation.
Commissioner Reed.
Thank you for that bit of information. If I were going to put a tire out by the road, would I need to call let everybody know?
Currently, right now, we have, if we observe it, our drivers call back and we get it on a list. It may not happen that day, but in the next 5 days, business days, it should happen.
Thank you.
And that automatically then gets added to the list of the 4 tires that were picked up or could be picked up that year at that address?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Walker.
And I don't mean to sound redundant, but I think Mr. Ruiz hit it on the head. What we're finding is not the good people that do call and make it known. Here, I got this stuff that got to be picked up, or I know I got 4 times a year I got bulk pickup. Those are the good-minded ones. What we're dealing with, the ones that are not doing that, the ones that find the pile that's been created, and I go take my stuff to that pile to add to it, that becomes a nuisance and become the health hazard. That's what we're dealing with, and I think Mr. Ruiz emphasized that's our challenge. So I'm looking at how can we help, and not only myself but you all as my colleagues, how can we help remedy some of this stuff? So that's what I want to make sure we understand.
All right, Mr. Ruiz, you want to continue on?
Yes, sir.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Ginn. Go ahead.
Yes.
Team.
Just to address the folks that are afraid to call in, a lot of times what we find is it may be an account that's behind in paying their bill or something, and they think that calling in for service might trigger something else. Well, solid waste, I hope this gets out, that solid waste, that does not matter to us. If you have something to be collected, we will come get it, no matter where you are in the paying your bill. Just so that sometimes that's the issue with piles that sit.
What do you do about someone who's doing remodeling and they just start piling on the street in front of their own home, or they're a builder and they're piling that in front of the home that they're remodeling, even as a subcontractor, and it sits for 2 weeks?
Yeah, typically contract debris, we usually contact that person and try to get them into a roll-off or a temporary box to contain that type of material, since true remodeling and construction and demolition type material is not something we deal with unless you have a permit and we are doing it properly.
Commissioner McCarley.
I kind of just wanted to go back to Commissioner Walker's point that more about a behavior change. And thank you, Mr. Ruiz, for putting this all together. But if you scroll a couple slides back, and I know you're probably going to go forward, but to look at, yes, sorry, I wasn't sure which one it was, the one with the big dump thing. You know, I think what we really need to be talking about, to Commissioner Walker's point, is how do we address, there are people, you know, who do the right thing and they'll make a phone call. Even in my neighborhood, I'm like, all you have to do is call solid waste. And I give them the number and then they understand, you know, it's straightforward. It is that growth of somebody putting one thing down and then many other piles, you know, compounding on it. So if there are specific areas, I guess this question is for Brian, if there are specific areas where we see this more often than not, are there things that we can do that shift the behavioral change that are as much penalty as they are avoidance? You know, are there ways to preempt some of this? And I think you spoke about it earlier about having pride in the community and taking care of your own neighborhood and being a good neighbor and people watching. But maybe this is for Mr. Ruiz and Commissioner Walker. Is there some kind of behavior thing, something we've seen in the past that we can apply to these dumping places?
I don't have the silver bullet. I would say our signage, the signage we've used up till now has been pretty plain, institutional in appearance, black and white, no dumping. That will be replaced or augmented by this particular sign. We've seen pretty good success, even with just signage, which maybe only transfers a problem, but we're going to stay after it on that front. And then I think getting people to report, whether it's when it's happening or as soon after it happens as they discover it, is our best hope for helping or showing the people who aren't dumping that we're serious and showing the people who are dumping that we're serious. To Gene's point about people calling, he and I and our staffs are going to be following this workshop to outline, formalize very clearly the things that will be picked up by solid waste based on location and account status, material composition, so that our code enforcement staff can make that call in those cases to solid waste without the owner or without his drivers having to see it and do it, just as another set of eyes, in a way of keeping that debris from sitting on the curb for too long. Because that, you know, there's a lot of the photographs, Commissioner Walker, that you showed at the last agenda study. Some of it wasn't illegally dumped. The landlord-tenant law requires that the landlord move their stuff out to the curb when they empty it from the house. Now, it breeds illegal dumping, and it's very unsightly, but that person didn't break the law by putting it out at the curb. So our charge at that point becomes get it gone as fast as we can, because they've paid for the service or their tenant paid for the service. I'll stop now and let Commissioner Walker or whoever else wants to respond to that.
Well, I like to chime in just saying I believe this effort with what I see before me, and thank you, Commissioner McCauley, for bringing it back before our face. If we're doing an aggressive move, I believe, this is me now, if we do an aggressive move to make sure our citizens know that we're serious about this particular element in our community, I believe we will see some traction from it. I just think, you know, we got to start somewhere. And I know we've done things in the past, but I believe if we just be more aggressive about letting folk know, because I've got comments since our last time talking about this when I shared those pictures. And back to your point with the pictures you mentioned that I showed, Mr. Ruiz, I do know one or two were people that put stuff on the street. And it just remained there, did not get picked up. But majority of those pictures were sites that were just vacant land and folks just throwing stuff out there. And I visibly saw it happening and stopped someone and asked, "What are you doing?" Well, we do this all the time. We do this all the time. Come on. So I think we have an aggressive kind of a situation here that we can share, that we're not going to take things lightly anymore. Have this campaign move forward in some kind of way. People would know, and that was another question I was going to ask when I was waiting till you finish. But since you asked me to comment even now, how best can we get the word out? Everybody does not go online. Everybody does not hear all this stuff that we're talking about in our four walls. I'm thinking about, hey, how can this be put in your utility bill to make sure folk know this is where we're going and things are happening, and we're gonna be on top of it. That's something I want to ask about.
Well, I know that Kevin Cook's office is planning to put it in the Access newsletter, that I think he said 140,000 get that newsletter emailed. It'll go in November, depending on what is decided here today. Additionally, Kevin may want to chime in on something. I'm not sure.
Well, he also wants to talk about the signs, Kevin.
Brian did a great job. We just know that in areas where we've had dumping, we've put signs warning people that it's illegal, and we've seen that signage work and it curbed the behavior. We've also know that signage, when you state that you're under surveillance, those signs work as well, and we've got a whole strategy there. And as Brian mentioned as well, the Access Lakeland newsletter, we were going to have it go out. The October issue goes out today. However, we want to make sure we have everything and decisions made today will be included in that article. So we're going to postpone that and send it out in November. But Brian did a great job talking about the signage.
All right. Mr. Bowling, did you have something you wanted to share too? I thought maybe you had something you wanted to share as well. That you thought.
No, sir. Somebody came into my office. I apologize.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was just misreading. Go ahead. Well, we just like input, so it's good. Commissioner Reed.
Thank you. There again, Philip, I'm really glad you brought this up. I think anybody's been a victim of this is excited. Usually this stuff happens at night. In our neighborhood, a month ago, somebody came through the neighborhood. It looked like on Sunday night. They just rode through the neighborhood and dumped out tires. They were laying in people's yard in the middle of the road. I was going down around Lake Parker the other night, the afternoon, towards power plant, and there's tires on the side of the road out on that area as well. And of course, one issue I found when I owned some property, I ultimately donated the property. I just couldn't keep it to the point where the police were satisfied, and I cleaned it up every weekend, but I donated it. But I could not, I couldn't fence the property to keep the people from dumping on it. And that was somewhat of an issue with me, but cleaning it every weekend and not getting, I couldn't catch anybody. And of course I had my game cameras were stolen too, because they get pretty smart at that type of stuff. But I can't be more excited about this, because I recently had pay $600 to get a bunch of stuff removed because they thought it's easier to dump it on my property than to go take care of it myself. And then I had to hire people to go and dump it. And so this is an exciting time for me. Thank you.
And I think that makes a great point. Where there's room even on the communication side, even with Ledger and Lakeland Now and LAL Today, to talk about that dump number, that phone number. Load this in your phone now, so that if you see someone dumping, you can just plug it in, because it's very safe for people to be able to have that preloaded and have it available if it's something that bothers them, and have it where they can look at the tag of the vehicle, and jot it down while they're driving by, and then call it right in. And the more that veiled threat exists, and the quicker that we can respond so that LPD has an opportunity to be able to get engaged on something like that, the better we all as citizens help clean up that kind of a problem. So that signage and the awareness of it is very, very important. Okay, we're going to kick this back to you, Mr. Ruiz, so you have this presentation under control.
I just have a couple of more bullets here. The discussion from February leading to now sort of revealed that our code enforcement system, business process, even though they address illegal dumping as code violations, we weren't tracking them as illegal dumping incidents. So where I can go into our system right now and report to you over whatever date range you like, the cases that involve overgrowth or open storage or junk trash and debris, I can't tell you which of those were most likely illegally dumped. So what we have done just in the last week is created a new subtype of violation that our code enforcement officers can select for illegal dumping when they are reasonably sure the condition that they are confronting is the result of illegal dumping. And what that will do, it really doesn't change anything in terms of their response to that pile. I mean, that will be born of the discussion we're having here today and the changes that we'll implement with solid waste and with the next bullet. But it will allow us 6 months, a year, 2 years from now to be able to report on experience where we are reasonably confident that piles were illegal dumping. So then we can say over time, have we seen more of it, less of it? How quickly on average do we get rid of it? Is it into compliance that we don't have the ability to do right now? So we need to fix that. And then the final bullet there is a discussion that we had with the attorney's office yesterday, involves the 15-day compliance deadline that is specified in Chapter 86 of our code. Those are the cases that you see monthly on an equalization roll for lots cleaning and clearing. That code provision is the only one actually that prescribes a number of days or a time frame within which someone can comply. The state statute for code enforcement and our own code enforcement ordinance only requires reasonableness, a reasonable time. And I'm, we can all disagree about what reasonable means. We're not proposing you change it to reasonable, but we, with your concurrence here today, will bring an amended or a proposed amended Chapter 86 to you that seeks to reduce that 15 days down to 7 days. That's a big deal, and that's raising the bar considerably for property owners, not just of illegal dumping, but of all open junk, trash, and debris, overgrowth, untended property, neglected property, that will definitely, it will echo the sentiment that several of you have made here this morning, and that is we're serious. We're serious about illegal dumping. We're serious about blight. We're serious about the appearance of our neighborhoods. And here's proof of that between signage and police response and a hotline and now a reduced compliance time frame for these types of cases.
I think that's excellent. And then would furthermore, when you go back to not having shorter time and also tracking by your subcategory, we also would build some data on where you ought to maybe consider putting a surveillance camera up, because you see enough frequency that that this is a place that would be warranted for us to kind of do that for a period of time. I have a couple questions. Love this, and I think we can then weigh in if this is something we want to give our thumbs up to. I have a son that lives in Boulder once a year in Colorado, and now you're in a sustainable culture. there's a deal where there's a week or maybe even 2 weeks that everybody puts out things that other people can have. In other words, where these are items that are big items, and this is a little askew from what we're talking about here, but it's kind of like share a community. So I have an old stove or an old range or an old TV or something, and everyone has the freedom in the city to pick those things up with their truck and take them. Have we ever explored anything like that? That's item A, and maybe this is a little bit for Gene and what you may have heard about in trade association shows. And then B, is you mentioned we don't want to create a mini landfill, but is there some history or some consideration where a mini landfill works, where there's an area where we might have our own city-owned lot, where there's a lot where there is some illegal dumping, where it would be prudent for us to put in a container, or is that just an unnecessary expense and not wise for other reasons? Those are my two points.
Gene, do you want to chime in on either or both of those?
I'll probably chime in on the second one first, just because it's, from my experience, it's the easiest. And putting an open container, trash receptacle anywhere in the city, it becomes unmanageable unless you tend to it every day. It seems like a great idea, but it's just the cost and the problems it creates, and nobody wants it near their house either.
Gene, could you also talk about the fact that having all the different types of debris or trash in one place has to be sorted out prior to going to the landfill, and just talk about the logistics and why that's an avenue that we didn't further explore?
Yeah, one of our obligations as solid waste is we can't deliver tires or yard waste to the landfill mixed with any other debris. So household trash items have to be collected separately. Brush has to be collected by a different truck, and then tires have to be collected by a different truck, because they all end up at 3 different places to be processed, and they can't be mixed. So secondarily, if you have an open dumpster, it would have tires and possibly chemicals and possibly yard waste and possibly household bags. So it would become difficult for us to manage. So the first question, I don't remember the full question on the first one you asked, Mayor. Sorry.
Well, the other one really is it's different from this work.
Oh.
It's different from this. It's about whether or not you would have these exchange days and tolerate an environment for that.
Yeah, I've experienced that. I've done it in controlled environments with a previous city I used to work for. We had exchange days where employees could bring things they don't want anymore that still worked, and other employees could pick them up. I've never done it in a citywide program.
It's very interesting. It looks very unusual when you sort of see it, because all over the town where you're driving, everybody has in front of their house some huge item of value, and it sits for a little while. And I think it's part of the culture of that city to a large degree as well, you know, to do some of those things that would probably not be necessary. And it certainly doesn't address the illegal dumping issue. That's a different one. So I thank you for weighing into the second item, which is what was more pertinent.
You're welcome.
Other questions or comments? Commissioner Madden.
Thank you, Mayor. Brian, I just got really excited about, just that small detail, adding that category so that we could have better data collection. I think that is fabulous. I mean, even if we could incorporate that into the tipsters, if people did start to maybe text a photo, or if there was some way to be able to collect the data so that we really do, we don't just think we've always seen it on this street or that street, but we really have facts on, yes, it is this street, absolutely, or it's this lot, or it's this frequency. I think that would be powerful information for us to have.
Regardless of the means of communication, whether they use the Citizens Action Center They call our code enforcement office directly. They call 834-DUMP and leave a voicemail, or they email. We have code@lakelandgov.net is also a box that goes to code enforcement. It doesn't matter which one they choose. If it's the result of a complaint, it gets categorized as a citizen complaint in our system. So given that piece of complaint plus the subtype of illegal dumping, now we can start to see how many of these things are we finding are on our own, or how many of them are we being alerted to by observant and civic-minded residents. Again, we just created it, so it's going to take some time for us to have data over a quarter of a year or a half a year to start to see trends or make decisions, but we got to start somewhere.
Commissioner McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Brian, and everyone for the overview. And I think concurring with Commissioner Madden, being able to see the trends, I was wondering from the beginning of this discussion if we had a way to look over time to see, is the problem getting worse? Is it in certain pockets? And how do we address that? So I see that being an incredibly valuable tool for us moving forward. Certainly would support the move from 15 days to 7 days, as you've outlined. I remember your comments when you first brought this to us in saying that 15 days is a long time for illegal dumping and for that problem to grow, for people to add stuff to the pile. So it seems to make sense to reduce that, and sending that, amplifying that message that this is important to us is the policy change behind it, that we've changed the length of time from 15 days to 7 days. So I certainly support that. And then just thinking of the mayor's ideas, and while certain things may not work for our city, I would encourage us to continue to look for innovative and creative ways to potentially improve this problem, solve the problem, and maybe there's something else that we just haven't thought of yet. And so I just want to encourage us to stay at the drawing board and keep looking to see, is there something we've missed, something we haven't thought of yet that would make a difference, would improve this, would get more people to be aware or to change behavior. It sounds like you all are doing that, and I certainly applaud that, but I would just encourage us to continue to think creatively when we can.
Excellent comments, Commissioner McLeod. Commissioner Walker.
Well, let me share, Mr. Lewis and staff. I'm very excited at this point. I'm almost about to jump out my chair. Now, I want to make sure that we can we're moving forward with this particular kind of change and how best we can deal with the particular subject matter. And I always compliment, and I try to make sure I do, staff, especially the ones that have called so many times during the course of a week, because this particular subject that we deal with in parts of our city. But I tell you, I welcome you to come live in my world one day, and you see what I'm talking about, some of this stuff. But I know everyone does not have to deal with certain situations as such, but I'm very excited, and I'm glad to know that staff, Mr. Lewis, Ms. Nicole Travis, and their team have thought about, how can we remedy it, and Mr. Jen, I know we talk a lot too, so I appreciate you, man. And thankfully, we'll move forward with this kind of an aggressive kind of a movement. I believe by doing this, we'll see some change. I do believe that, because I think our residents will see the seriousness of what we're wanting to make sure that don't happen in our community, various communities in our city. We're not going to deal with these kind of situations. So I applaud what is at best is moving forward. And I will hope that my colleagues, along with myself, will be on board to have this particular effort move forward. Thank you again.
So there's three areas for our assent in this. One is the 25,000 foreclosure utilization for SWIP removal, and then to provide some tips and to have that tip-off line. It acknowledges the use of the dump number that's in place, but then triages when the person calls in either to immediately for LPD because it's in process, or then it goes to code enforcement. And the second is reduced to 7 days from 15 days. I think those are the elements you really want us to weigh in on, Mr. Russ. Anything else beyond that?
Those are the big ones.
So if you concur, let's raise our hands high on that effort as a commission. So you're all in. You're 100% assent. And then Mr. Reed, Commissioner Reed, I think has something else to add.
Thank you. Brian, I presume we've reinitiated our code enforcement now that the COVID thing is under control. Is that a fair statement?
Generally, yes.
Was it?
I mean, they're resuming hearings.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
They're resuming hearings this month and early next month. And they're back citing violations as they did before the pandemic. So, what I wanted to say on the heels of Commissioner Walker's final comments were that we have heard Commissioner Walker and now the balance of the city commission that this is critically important to you. And so it will be among the highest priorities for not only our code enforcement staff, but our neighborhood outreach folks, our police department, solid waste. I can't thank Kevin Cook in communications and Gene and Ruben and Captain Bowling enough for, really coming together to address this issue. None of us can do it alone. It takes a village. Y'all can figure out what member of the village I am, but I appreciate their work.
Well, thank you. Again, I think there was a hiatus for a short period of time, and we have one yard in our neighborhood we've been calling on for several weeks, and I don't think it's been addressed. It's on Buena Drive, and the grass is well over knee high. And I guess we'll have to call in again today, but I don't have the physical address, but I know it's on Buena Drive, and you can't miss it. But
I'll have to look into it. There are a lot of reasons why it might not be addressed, and some of those reasons involve bankruptcies and foreclosures and things that are outside of our control, but we'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Reed, I was out there personally this week and we took care of it. The property owner has been cited, and if it's not cleaned up in the 15 days, since we cited it, we'll have it cleaned up.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it.
Mr. Danny, you do a great job, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Any other comments? All right. I think that ends our workshop. Thank you so much for the work done in the background to make it happen, and the real work's ahead. So thanks very much, and I hope you all have a great day.